Hi there, I'm Beth, one of the writers for D&D Duet, and in this video today I wanted to go over some of my session prep for session 0 of our Tales of Eldura campaign, which is based on and kind of a rewriting of Baldur's Gate Descent into Avernus. So I'll be looking at some of what I prepped but for before our game, mostly in Google Docs. Some of it, of course, was done in the book, and I also will go over some of the things that I looked at in Roll20. Roll20, which is where we're starting. I went ahead and made a special Tales of Eldura landing page for our wonderful PC Gareth, who we can see right here. And then later, although we didn't get to it in this session, we'll have my PC Evelyn, who's right here. So beyond that, just in terms of setup, we bought the Descent into Avernus package on Roll20, so a lot of the things are done for us, although they weren't things that I was using for session 0. So for example, there's the start page, you have this alternate landing page as well, and then after those there's a random battle map, which we ended up using, some maps of Baldur's Gate, and then some of the different places where you'll end up along the adventure, as well as those tokens that you saw just a moment ago. Let me go back to our kind of main page. I spent the first part of the session here on this page. This is our world map of Eldura, which is where the campaign is taking place. So I had that made before the campaign, but you're still going to want something along those lines for your campaign if it's taking place in a different world than your player is used to. And I still think that having a world map, even if it is a place that they're used to, can be beneficial and helpful. So the other things that I had created in advance of prepping for this session specifically were working on a history of Eldora. So some of this ended up, and this part isn't so important, but some of this ended up in our document, which I loaded for things for Jonathan to be able to reference. And so you can go into the journal portion of Roll20. And if you're not doing your game online, that's totally fine. You might still want to send your players some Google Docs in advance or give them a couple printouts just so they have a basic understanding of the things that their character would know. Because that's one of the things, especially when you're playing one-on-one, that can be a little bit frustrating or difficult is when there's a gap between what you know as a person and what your character would absolutely know beyond a shadow of a doubt. And so this is some of the basic history of the world that I wanted to make sure that Jonathan had access to. Same thing with the map. And then I also added the Respite Gazette, which I pulled off of a Google Doc that I had made that has a little bit more detail in terms of especially this illegal organization called the Brigade than what I sent him, but this has the kind of official organizations of the city, and these were going to be entities that he encountered or would encounter, or like the Guild of the Glove, an entity that he is actually a part of. And so that way, Gareth, or Jonathan has access to the things that Gareth knows. So those are some of the kind of basic background types of things that I made sure he had access to. We also set up our two characters, and we don't have a character sheet here because we did build them in Roll20, and we're using I'm sorry, I can't remember the name of the plugin, but we'll try to put a link to it in the show notes. So same thing for Gareth, but we can see here's where the players ended up. So Gareth ended up leaving this tavern where we were having a combat, and so anyway, things didn't go exactly as I thought that they would for session 0, but I did have this tavern set up in advance. I had not prepared for us to be on this random battle map place in the middle of the street, but it worked out just fine, and it's my understanding that there are other map resources on Roll20, so I'll be referencing those in the future to kind of pull from if needed. But it's nice to have some form of, whether it's if you're playing in person, have kind of a blank slate where you can sketch out a map really quickly if you need to, because especially in a session 0, things may go differently than you're anticipating. In terms of prep beyond that, oh, here it is. I like to keep things relatively simple and straightforward. So I read through the first chapter of the book and decided the things that I wanted to change. I knew I wanted to change where the world was. I knew I wanted to move to a different city. And so that's how we ended up in our homebrew world of Eldura and that central city of Respite, which you saw on this map that we made. Thank you, Incarnate. I love the new mapping features where you can do the here, like with the sepia runs. But back to the outline. I like to have an idea of where the session is going, and I went ahead and added some cues for myself here, like switching to the blacksmith music when we got to that point in the campaign. So we kind of set up our video. And part of the reason I'm recording this right now is our video didn't record all the way for our session 0. We're really sorry about that. We were so excited to show you all. And so we just have my mic's side of the things, and Jonathan's ended up not picking up. So good thing we kind of practiced and tried. But I did still want to talk about how we set up for any sort of campaign, but especially to show you how to set up for a campaign online. Um, I think it's really easy, especially when you're starting out as a DM, to over prepare. And so to help you kind of break away from that, I I suggest having just kind of a general idea of where you're headed. So your two primary responsibilities as a DM are to the player who you're making the game for and to the overarching story. And so that's not to say that the player has to follow the story, but you're trying to create an enjoyable story for the two of you to interact with and just have fun playing. And so to me, the best way to do that is to start with more for me, it's more of a person and location based outline. So here I knew we wanted to start in the blacksmith shop with where it is in the city. And I wanted, sorry, my dog came to visit. I wanted there to be a few different people for Gareth to meet, some of whom he already knows, like Tamara and James, and then some of whom were new, which were Captain Ward and Maverick. Captain Ward being my rewriting of Captain Zodge in the Avernus module, if you're familiar with it, who's a really severe character and basically won't take no for an answer with what he's trying to make the characters do. I don't love that as a campaign prompt, and so I wanted to have another offering, and so that's where Captain Ward came in. Same thing with Maverick, and I tried to leave myself, especially because we're recording, some different voice notes for here's how this person comes across, or here's maybe some of their mannerisms or something, so that if they needed to come back or if I needed to reference them later, I would have them there. Um, the other thing I think that can be helpful, you have the location names. So here we've moved from the blacksmith shop as our central location where Gareth works and lives, and we've moved to an outer ring of the city at the Ferry Door Inn, which is where the secret meeting of the brigade takes place that was meant to really get Gareth going on his adventure. Again, a loose sketch of what happens. So the inn gets invaded by the guards. The brigade attacks the guards back. In this case, what happened was that Gareth wasn't as inclined to engage, which ended up really cool and interesting. So he ended up outside of the tavern, and this actually isn't Captain Ward. I moved on to my next character, who is Captain Millicent Legree, who is part of a different part of the city guard. And so we'll recap that in our next session and kind of go over what happened in this one. But having this looser structure for your online or in-person game will help prevent you from, especially right at the beginning, railroading the player or sending them only in one direction. But instead, if you have some loose pieces that you can move between as needed to keep things more fluid, that will really enable you to follow what the player wants to do for their PC, because their primary job, besides having fun, is to be true to their character. And especially in a session 0, you don't know yet what that character wants, who they are, what they're going to do. It can be harder to kind of anticipate that, especially if they're playing somebody who is new or different. So Gareth, for example, is rather different from a lot of Jonathan's characters because he is, especially right now, he remains law abiding, but he's a little bit more passive or at least reluctant. And so we have this gap between the call to adventure, which Jonathan as a person can hear and the call to adventure that Gareth, who doesn't know that he is in a D&D game, um, doesn't really want to respond to because he wants his life to remain as it is. And so at that point in the adventure, he hasn't run into enough disruption to be like, yes, I want to engage in this. But especially since our eventual destination for this campaign is hell, I want to make sure that I'm giving the character enough time to get emotionally on board for where they're trying to go and why they want to get there. So I do have reasons for that that involve Gareth's son, who is placed in the city which is under attack, which in our world is Beacon. And so eventually our party will be going over here. But this just gives you an idea of some of the things to have set up or maybe to not have set up for your first game. So we played for several hours, at least 3 hours, I think, but we took a break partway through. But still, all of that with just this kind of pretty basic and straightforward outline. We did have a combat, actually, we had two combats that we went through relatively quickly since there were more outside forces beyond Gareth, but I wanted the city to seem really lively and full and difficult to navigate or manage at times because I want Gareth to be caught up in some of these larger forces that he's resisting. So I hope that that gives you an idea of some of the things to prep for your sessions. So again, just to review quickly, kind of basic sketch, location with people to meet in the location, what they want, maybe a few quotes for what they might say, how they speak, a next location with a few different NPC names. You can also keep fantasy name generators pulled up. That's an amazing website that I use often, and I'll tend to pull syllables from it to make kind of more unique names, but all the offerings there are really wonderful. And again, here, just kind of a sketch of what's going to happen as the situation escalates, and then how do we transition to the next session. So I hope that this was helpful, and I would love to hear in the comments below how you plan your games. And we'll link to any relevant blog posts that we think will kind of help with setting up a campaign arc, as well as the future campaigns in our Tales of Eldura series. Thank you guys so much.